In Philadelphia, a young couple walks down a crowded street and is never seen again.
2 adults just vanished off the face of the earth, and no one saw anything.
In Iowa, the disappearance of a 12-year-old paper boy spawns a groundbreaking search and rumors of a sinister conspiracy.
Ran chills down the spine. It's like, this can't be happening.
And in Denver, the race to find a missing child leads her family on an unbelievable mission.
No child should be forgotten.
Beth Holloway is on a cross-country journey to help 3 families uncover the truth about their missing loved ones. Now, on Vanished.
In 2005, I got the call telling me that my daughter, Natalie, had vanished.
Every parent's worst nightmare became my reality.
I asked the world to help me.
I found myself in an unimaginable fight. But my search for answers gave me a new mission in life.
Bring the missing home and criminals to justice.
Growing up in South Philadelphia, Danielle Latobre was always known as a free spirit.
What were some of the passions and hobbies that Danielle had?
She loved to sing. She was just a ball of fire. She would come into a room and the whole room would light up.
As she got older, Danielle was in 2 or 3 different bands, and that was her hobby. That was her passion, music.
But in 2001, Danielle puts her dreams of being a rock star on hold. In September, she marries her boyfriend, Joe Imbo Jr. Soon after, their son, Joseph Imbo III, is born.
Once her son Joe was born, she really, buckled down.
Danielle's son is the love of her life. But her marriage quickly disintegrates. In 2004, she and Joe separate. And Danielle reconnects with a childhood friend, a local baker named Richard Petronne.
Tell us a little bit about Richard and about things that were going on in his life.
He was 100% no matter what he did, and he ran our bakery, and happy-go-lucky kind of person, very laid back.
He loved to talk. He loved to have a good time. And he would always be the one that cracked a joke or told a funny story or just did something that always lightened the mood.
Like Danielle, Richard is also a single parent and shares custody of his 14-year-old daughter, Angela.
He cooked for her. They went fishing. He took her to concerts. He was just an amazing father.
In addition to their children, Richard and Danielle bond over a shared love of music.
They just seem to enjoy each other tremendously. They seem to have a lot of fun together.
But after a year of dating, Danielle decides to slow things down.
She basically decided that she was going to take a break from everything and just be a mom to her son. Little Joe was going to be the only man in her life.
But Richard Petronne won't give up that easily. On February 16, 2005, he asks Danielle for a date. Danielle says yes and makes arrangements with her ex-husband to keep their son that weekend.
It was just a spur of the moment. They were going to meet and have a drink.
Saturday, February 19th. At 9 p.m., Danielle meets Richard at a bar called Abilene, where they run into Richard's old friend, Anthony Valentino, and his soon-to-be wife, Michelle.
Danielle and Rich were both happy, smiling, very friendly, good moods. It was the first night I ever met Danielle. She seemed very sweet.
We were having a good time. We just had a couple drinks.
But as the evening wears on, Danielle becomes eager to go home. She has an appointment in the morning with Richard's sister, who happens to be Danielle's hairdresser. Around 11:30 p.m., Danielle decides to call it an evening. Richard offers to drive her home, but his truck is parked a few blocks away. So after they say their goodbyes, the Valentinos watch as Richard and Danielle slowly disappear down the street.
He said, "I love you, man," and that was the last we ever saw him.
The next morning, Danielle's brother, John Latobre, knocks on the front door of his sister's condo.
I promised Danielle I would go over to her house and fix a couple things that were broken. She wasn't there, and it concerned me.
John has a copy of Danielle's house key and lets himself in.
The dishes were clean and on the countertop. The bed was never turned down. Right then and there, I got a pit in my stomach. I knew something was wrong. I knew it from that minute.
John calls his mother, Felice. She hasn't heard from Danielle either. But she has heard from Richard Petronne's sister, who is equally as concerned.
She said, Mrs. O'Tober, Danielle never showed up to keep the appointment. That's not like her. I said, no, that's not like her. So I said, did you talk to your mother? Did your mother talk to Richard?
Felice contacts Richard's mother, Marge Petronne. But Marge has some shocking news of her own. Richard is also missing.
He always answered his cell phone, always. At that point, I started to worry, and I sent my sister, who lives in South Philly, to his apartment, and he wasn't home.
Now we're both in like this panic mode because she talked to her son the way I talk to Danielle all the time.
Even more troubling is the fact that Danielle is supposed to pick up her son at 3 o'clock that afternoon, but she never does. So the Otobres and Petronnes decide to reach out to police. But it will be 48 hours before the cops can treat this as a missing persons case. Neither family is willing to wait. They form their own plan of attack.
And I just went to the Petronne's house. At this point, it was probably 11, 12 o'clock at night. And I said, Mr. Petronne, what are we going to do? And he said, let's go. Let's just go.
Johnny and I get in a car and we drive to the city and we drive all around the South Street area looking for the truck.
We knocked on every police station door. We hit every hospital. We drove over 3 bridges back and forth, down the shoulder of the road with our hazards on, looking in the woods to see if maybe they were in an accident.
Despite the efforts of both families, the search for Richard and Danielle comes up empty.
It's just bizarre that 2 responsible people could just vanish off the face of the earth in a big giant truck, and no one saw anything, heard anything. It just doesn't make any sense at all.
On Monday, February 21st, local police formally declare Richard and Danielle missing persons. But in an unexpected twist, they label Richard Petronne as a possible person of interest and speculate that Danielle's decision to slow things down might have sparked a jealous rage.
When all this was transpiring, they were beginning to suggest a possible motive that would have prompted Richard to do this.
I was horrified, and they weren't engaged to be married. They were just dating occasionally. And he understood, that she wasn't ready or for whatever reason, he wasn't upset about it. Not at all.
Marge Petronne is convinced her son is innocent, but the Philadelphia police aren't so sure. As with many missing persons cases, they ask the FBI to assist. The feds start by looking into any cell phone or credit card activity that might have taken place after Richard and Danielle vanished.
There is no activity on their cell phones. There is no activity on their money cards or credit cards. There's just no activity, period.
That started police down the road of looking at all the more nefarious possibilities that they may have been taken against their will. Were they kidnapped? Were they carjacked? Were they, taken at gunpoint?
The FBI begins pulling surveillance footage from nearby bridges and toll roads.
All the bridges going to New Jersey, the Delaware Memorial Bridge, all bridges were checked. Unfortunately, most of the cameras are catching folks going through the toll. Normally, only when somebody blows through a toll, the cameras zoom in on the car. So there's no luck there.
As the hours and the days went on, it was nothing. It was so surreal. But I knew in my heart that something was terribly wrong. I just knew it.
After a night on the town, Danielle Imbo and Richard Petronne vanish into a throng of partygoers on Philadelphia's South Street. Nearly 2 months have passed, and investigators are no closer to solving the case. But on April 13, 2010, a bizarre chain of events begins to unfold and yields the first true break in the case. It starts with the arrest of a seasoned criminal named Robert Carey.
Robert Carey is a well-known knock-around guy from the Fishtown section of Philadelphia, and he had quite a reputation as being a tough guy, a violent guy, a guy with a temper, and at some point became a suspect in a massive drug investigation. Carey was jailed in that case, and a day later, Carey hung himself in jail.
But not before Carey allegedly tells several associates that he'd been hired to kidnap and execute Danielle Imbo and Richard Petronne.
People who, realizing he was dead, were now not afraid, started to come forward saying, Carey said, you know, I was down on South Street that night. You know that situation with that couple on South Street? That was me.
When they told you this, how did that hit you?
The only thing that they've ever said was that it was murder for hire. That's what they believe it was, which, you know, is hard, very hard.
I knew that you were coming to that point that you just wanted answers at any cost. You just wanted to know.
But who would hire Robert Carey to kill Richard and Danielle? The FBI floats the idea that Richard might have owed money to a drug dealer or a bookie.
They were beginning to suggest a possible motive.
And I told the FBI, my son wasn't a gambler, didn't do drugs, he was a worker. He just worked and took care of his daughter.
His request, i.e. murder for hire.
But with the self-proclaimed triggerman dead, investigators are having trouble moving the case forward.
We have not identified an official suspect in this investigation. We will follow through on anything within reason to help us get to that next step.
I don't even care who's responsible anymore. I just want to bring her home and say goodbye the right way. I want everybody to have an opportunity to say goodbye to probably the most wonderful person I've ever known.
I truly believe, due to all your hard efforts, that it will pay off one day, and you'll get the answers you've been so desperately seeking. I know you could have never imagined the journey ahead of you.
Just miss him so much.
Richard and Danielle were last seen in South Philadelphia on February 19, 2005. Richard is 5 feet 9 inches tall and has blue eyes. Danielle is 5 feet 5 inches tall with brown hair and hazel eyes. If you have information about Danielle or Richard, please go to mylifetime.com/vanished and click on the tips button. Coming up, West Des Moines, Iowa, 1982. 12-year-old Johnny Gosch has a Sunday morning paper route. Until one morning, he vanishes.
A young boy delivering newspapers, which every God-fearing American kid wants to do, ends up disappearing.
As the search for Johnny unfolds, a terrifying theory emerges.
They were kidnapping and selling children.
Human trafficking is driven by money, more money, and more money.
Beth Holloway sets out to learn the truth about the heartbreaking and groundbreaking search for Johnny Gosch.
We put this picture on a milk carton. That was the very first one that ever took place.
When a child is missing, parents will cling to any information that gives them hope. But one family's 30-year mission to find their son has brought them face to face with evidence almost too shocking to believe and too frightening to ignore.
West Des Moines, Iowa, 1982. Fifth grader Johnny Gosh is his parents' pride and joy.
Johnny was a great kid, do anything for anybody.
He was a delightful little guy, so happy and just fun to have in the house. And he would be so kind to other people as he started to grow up.
At the age of 12, Johnny decides he wants to make some money. He begs his parents to take on a paper delivery route.
What was he saving for?
He was saving for a dirt bike.
I know you had to be so proud of his decision to take on a paper route to earn money.
He was a special kid.
Johnny's parents agreed to the paper route with one condition.
The only thing that I said was that one of us, the parents, his dad or myself, had to be with him when he did the route, because he was getting out before daylight, going out in the dark.
But on Sunday, September 5th, 1982, Johnny decides to do the paper route by himself. At 5:45 a.m., while his parents sleep, Johnny slips out of the house. An hour later, the phone rings at the Gosh residence.
It was a neighbor saying they didn't get their paper. And they said, "What's wrong? Is Johnny running late today?" And it was the first time it ever happened.
Johnny's father immediately begins searching the neighborhood.
I went out, started looking, going from block to block, and didn't see anything. And kept looking and looking and looking, and I knew something wasn't right. I didn't know what, but something wasn't right. And that's when the panic set in.
Johnny's father came back and said, "He's gone. His wagon is sitting up at the corner, full of papers. The bundles have not even been cut. Something is definitely wrong."
The Goshes track down the other paper boys that work with Johnny, and they tell a terrifying story.
The paper carrier saw this person in this Ford Fairmont stop, back up, and talk to Johnny.
The guy said, "Hey, kid, where's 86th Street?" And Johnny turned to the older boy and said, "There's something wrong with this guy." He said, "I'm scared. I'm going home."
According to the paper carriers, as soon as Johnny started walking away, another stranger began following him on foot.
We don't feel that Johnny even realized he was being followed because the man stayed a ways behind.
Fearing something terrible has happened, the Goshes contact the police.
The officer at the time knew that this wasn't a runaway, this is something that was serious, so he called in area officers to come in and start doing a canvass of the neighborhood.
The police quickly discovered that a neighbor witnessed what happened to Johnny next. At the end of the block, Johnny was ambushed by the Ford Fairmont and the man seen following him on foot.
The car pulled up, somebody jumped out, and just like that, they both grabbed him, threw him in the car, and they took off, screeching tires and running the stop sign.
I know your heart must have sank, Noreen.
I began calling friends that we had all over the city, asking them to organize search parties to do something.
We searched all around the Des Moines area. Our basement became a copy center. I don't know how many hundreds of thousands of flyers we did send out, but that was part of the first reaction.
The search lasts several weeks, but Johnny isn't found.
You'd pray that they would find something, but you would pray that they didn't. And each time they would come back and didn't find a body, that was reason to be hopeful.
While the police continue searching, the Goshes enlist the help of a private investigator. He puts forth a disturbing theory: that Johnny might have been kidnapped by an organized group of pedophiles.
If you look at these kidnappings, you have to first figure out what type of kidnapping is it. Is it a parental or custodial kidnapping? Is it a pedophilia type kidnapping?
Taking kids for prostitution rings, pornography rings, whatever. Friend, chills down the spine, it's like, this can't be happening.
But 6 months later, in Oklahoma, a bizarre incident gives the theory credence and provides investigators with the first break in Johnny's case.
6 months after Johnny's disappearance, you learn that he is alive. What happened?
This woman was at a convenience center, and a young boy came running up to her and screamed, "I am Johnny Gosh, please help me, I've been kidnapped." Before the woman could do anything, 2 men came around the side of the building, grabbed him, put him back in a car, and then took off.
Police are unable to track down the car or its passengers. And despite the sighting in Oklahoma, 2 years pass without any new leads. Then, on August 12, 1984, 13-year-old Eugene Martin is abducted from the streets of West Des Moines. Like Johnny, Eugene is in the middle of his Sunday morning paper route.
The similarities are obvious. Just about the same age, both paper carriers, just about the same time of year.
2 young boys now suddenly vanishing.
It just created panic. People wouldn't let their kids out of the house alone because they didn't know who would be next.
A year and a half after Eugene Martin's disappearance, a third young boy, 13-year-old Mark Allen, also vanishes from the streets of Des Moines.
One of the things that came out of this is that nobody knew how bad the problem was. We had no concept about how many children were being abducted.
The kidnappings prompt the Goshes to take a revolutionary approach to finding their son and to helping others whose children have vanished.
We put this picture on a milk carton. That was the very first one that ever took place. I remember going to the dairy in Iowa and said, "Hey, can we do this?" And they thought it was a good idea.
The idea takes off. Soon, missing children are being profiled on milk cartons across the country. Many of these children are ultimately found. Not Johnny Gosh.
It's a bad dream. It really is. People would come up and say, "Well, we know how you feel." And I would think, no, you don't.
In 1982, 12-year-old Johnny Gosh vanishes while delivering his morning paper route. 7 years later, the Goshes are still searching for their son.
There's no time for a pity party when this stuff happens. If parents don't look for their kids, nobody else is going to do it.
Finally, in May of 1989, there's a break in the case. A Nebraska convict by the name of Paul Bonassi tells the police that he knows firsthand what happened to Johnny.
Paul Bonassi said, "I helped with the Johnny Gosh kidnapping. I was the one in the car. I was in the back seat. I was the one that jumped out and grabbed Johnny's legs, while the man who followed Johnny grabbed his shoulders."
They had a couple of pictures of Johnny, and they said that this is the one that they wanted to get.
Bonassi says he's part of a vast network of sexual predators operating across the Midwest. A network that ensnared Bonassi himself when he was a teenager.
Paul Bonassi was a victim who was also used. These children, after they have been molested, they themselves become part and recruit other kids to be put into this. And as long as a boy behaves, he can survive.
Noreen sets up a face-to-face meeting with Paul Bonassi in prison.
I feel so bad about it because what they made me do.
Bonassi broke down and just cried when he saw me. And he said, "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry for what I did. But they forced me to."
Noreen is certain she finally knows what happened to her son. But her husband isn't so sure.
He was saying a lot of things that were kind of hard to believe. I would say about 40% of it was the truth and 60% was made up. Noreen believed this kid 100%, and but I didn't.
In 1992, Bonassi is released from prison and tells his story on the TV show America's Most Wanted. As part of the show, Bonassi leads a film crew to an abandoned ranch in Colorado, where he claims Johnny Gosch and countless other boys were once held captive.
This is where they kept some of the kids hidden away underneath the house here. I almost couldn't do it, to even go near the house, because I got up there and the memories flooded back of the last time I was here and leaving here, because this was the last place I ever seen Johnny Gosch at.
Shortly after Bonassi's segment airs, Noreen is contacted by a young man named Jimmy Gibson. He also claims to have been at the ranch with Johnny.
Were there any proof of life questions that you could ask Jimmy that he could answer correctly to make sure that you knew it was your Johnny?
I asked and verified about the birthmark that Johnny had on his chest. And Jimmy described the shape of it perfectly, along with other things that Johnny told him that he had in his room. That information had never been in a news story. Never. And Jimmy knew it.
Jimmy Gibson also tells Noreen about a horrible identifying mark that all the boys held captive at the ranch now bear.
The brand is what they call the rocking X, like a half of a circle, and then there's an X in the center. Jimmy had that brand on his leg. Paul Bonassi carries that brand. Jimmy told us that Johnny also carries that brand.
It's a story almost too sadistic to be true, but investigators are already familiar with the notorious Rocking X.
In the underground, we started observing and hearing about the Rocking X in about 1968-69. We had followed it out to somewhere in Colorado where there was a Rocking X operation going on. That was the last I knew of it. And then when Johnny came along and I saw the Rocking X again, I immediately knew what the Rocking X was.
Jimmy Gibson claims that many of the young boys managed to escape the ranch where Rocking X held them captive. Among them was Johnny Gosch, but Jimmy has no idea where Johnny is now. To Noreen, Jimmy Gibson's story gels with everything she knows about her son's disappearance. Johnny's father doesn't think so.
It was like there was too many lies being laid out on the table there in front of us.
The differences of opinion, coupled with the strain of losing Johnny, eventually drives a wedge between them. 11 years after their son vanished, Noreen and John Gosch divorce.
Oh, it just tears you apart, basically. So, especially when you got opinions. Each of us had opinions of what may have happened or how it happened or who could have been involved.
Years pass, and the Gosches are still no closer to finding their son. But according to Noreen, one night in 1997, a miracle happens.
There was a knock on your door.
I said, "Who is it?" He said, "It's me, Mom, it's Johnny. Can I come in?" And I knew it was him. I could feel that it was him.
Now he's a 27, 28-year-old man.
Yes. And I thought he was home to stay.
But according to Noreen, Johnny tells her it's unsafe for him to even be talking to her. And just 3 hours after walking back into his mother's life, Johnny vanishes again.
He said, "I can't stay. I'm only here for a short time. I need your help. I want these men arrested so that we can live freely."
As soon as Noreen Gosch makes the encounter public, Johnny's father questions its validity.
I was hoping it was true, but the way that she described it, it did not seem very believable at all.
Has Noreen's grief deluded her about the truth surrounding her son's disappearance? It seems that way, until one day in 2008, when Noreen receives an anonymous letter containing a chilling set of pictures.
I pulled out this picture of Johnny bound and gagged, and I literally could not get my breath. There were 2 other pictures in the packet. One had 3 boys laying on a bed,
all bound and gagged.
Are the pictures real? The boys in the photos bear no sign of the Rocking X brand, nor do they resemble the two missing Des Moines boys, Mark Allen and Eugene Martin. But one of them does bear a strong likeness to Johnny. Noreen is convinced it's him.
I took my photos to the police department, and when I opened up the folder and they saw the pictures, they kept saying, "Oh my God, it's Johnny, it's Johnny, it's Johnny."
However, authorities will not publicly confirm the boy in the photo is Johnny, and many people familiar with the case, including Johnny's father, doubt their authenticity.
I could tell it wasn't him and didn't have to go any further. Something to do with his shape of his ankles and his legs. I know he had long legs, but it just, something wasn't right. He was 5'7", and looking at that kid, I would probably put him in at about 5'4". It just wasn't him.
Whether the photos are real or not, one fact remains. Nearly 30 years have passed since Johnny Gosch disappeared on his Sunday morning paper route. And in the decades since Johnny first appeared on the now legendary milk carton, a lot has changed, both in the way sexual predators network with each other and in the way law enforcement hunts them down.
The interesting thing about that is on the computer, no matter when you punch that key, somebody can follow it.
What do you hope for your future, Noreen?
I hope I live long enough to bring some resolution to these cases, to help these young boys so they can be free one day and just live a normal life.
We can find terrorists in unbelievable parts of this world, but we can't find a kidnapper in West Des Moines, Iowa.
I always still think of Johnny as a 12-year-old instead of 41 years old, what he would be today. Walking down the streets, I'm looking at faces and trying to think what would he look like. But down deep, I'm still looking at a 12-year-old. And that's a hard thing.
Johnny Gosch was last seen in West Des Moines, Iowa in September of 1982. He has light brown hair, blue eyes, and a birthmark on his chest. He may also bear the Rocking X brand. Today, Johnny would be 42 and may resemble the man depicted in this age progression photo. Mark Allen has brown hair and blue eyes. He would be 39 years old. Eugene Martin would be 40. He has brown hair and brown eyes. If you have information about Johnny Gosch, Eugene Martin, or Mark Allen, please go to mylifetime.com/vanished and click on the tips button.
When a person goes missing, every moment counts. The speed that a search begins can mean the difference between life or death. In one Colorado case, the effort of an unlikely hero inspires a lifelong mission to save time and to save lives.
May 1993. Allie Berelez is a precocious 5-year-old living in a blue-collar suburb of Denver with her mother Maribel and just down the road from her grandfather Richard.
Tell us about Allie.
She was a beautiful little girl, energetic, full of life, enjoyed everything that a 5-year-old enjoys doing, playing outside, jumping, running. She was very talkative, very smart, very bright.
May 18th, 6 p.m. Allie, her mom, and Allie's 2 little brothers have just returned home from grocery shopping.
She was kind of antsy, and I thought I would let her outside for a little while I put away the groceries. I could look out the kitchen window and see her, plus I left the door open. So I wasn't really too worried.
Moments later, the afternoon takes an unthinkable turn.
When I went out to get her, she was gone.
911. I need someone to come to my home. My little girl's gone. I think she's been kidnapped.
The first thing that came out of my mouth was that my daughter had been kidnapped.
What makes you think she's been kidnapped? I've looked everywhere for her, all over the complex. She's nowhere to be found.
I knew right away in my heart something had happened.
Moments after receiving Marivel's 911 call, police arrive on the scene. The only eyewitnesses are Allie's brothers, Benjamin and Samuel. But Benjamin is only 2 years old, and Samuel is 3.
As much as he could speak, he mentioned that the man took her. But we don't know who the man was. And he didn't know either. He just must have seen somebody take her, walk off with her.
In a matter of minutes, investigators have organized a massive search party. But 72 hours later, there's still no sign of Allie.
Police officers, the firefighters, the volunteers, they covered about 400 square blocks, and it just wasn't bringing the information that we needed. It wasn't bringing Allie home.
That's when investigators decide to call in a unique breed of police officer, a bloodhound named Yogi.
Yogi was amazing. He really was. He has a tool that we as people don't have. His nose can pick up scent 500 times better than a human.
Once on the scene, Yogi is provided with what's called a scent object. In Allie's case, it's a t-shirt she has recently worn.
Yogi followed that scent with nose down, tail up, and he was on hot pavement, he was on highways, there was traffic, there was exhausts, there was the hot Colorado sun beating down on him.
After tracking Allie's scent for nearly 15 miles, Yogi leads investigators to an isolated canyon road. There, police discover a small canvas bag lying next to a creek bed.
It was almost like getting punched in the gut. You knew that you didn't want to go and look, and you knew that it probably was, but you kept hoping that maybe it wasn't. And when it was confirmed that it was Allie, everybody's heart just sunk.
I was expecting to be able to hold her and touch her, but of course, I would have been tampering with evidence. It's like I lost my sight. I couldn't see. I think I just was so scared.
Although several suspects are investigated, ultimately no one is charged with Allie Berelez's murder. To this day, the investigation into Allie's death remains open. But the Berelez family remains indebted to amazing work done by Yogi.
I was able to say my goodbyes to her. I know that he was the one that brought her back home. And I was very thankful that Yogi was available to do that.
So today I'd like to say that the children of the state of Colorado.
The Berelez family is so grateful for the work done by Yogi that they decide to start the Allie Foundation, a non-profit organization dedicated to the training of search and rescue dogs like Yogi.
My father wanted to have a foundation in Allie's memory, and we came up with the name, Abducted, Lost, Innocent Enough.
Allie's grandfather, Richard, is so dedicated to the cause, he becomes the organization's lead trainer.
What if Yogi had been there within the hour? Maybe our granddaughter would have been found. My goal would be to be there within the hour and hopefully find that child alive. That would be my greatest accomplishment in my heart and soul. If I could do that for a child, then that would be a great tribute to Allie.
It doesn't take long for Richard Berelez's dream to come true. In 1994, a young girl vanishes during a massive snowstorm. Police call in Richard's first trainee, a young bloodhound appropriately named Allie. In a matter of a couple hours, Allie tracks the girl to a snow-covered parking lot not far from her home.
I got a call from the officer who had the dog, and he says, "Richard, I have good news. The dog that you donated has saved her life. She was found just in time." So that was great news.
Your work paid off so beautifully and so quickly. And Richard, you were able to save the life of this little girl.
In doing so, the Allie Foundation transformed Richard and Maribel's tragic loss into a lasting legacy.
I don't want people to forget Allie. I don't want them to see her just as another child that was murdered. No child should be forgotten.
If you have information about any of the missing people seen tonight, please go to mylifetime.com/vanished and click on the tips button.
What is the Johnny Gosch Law, Noreen?
Johnny Gosch Law was created to ensure immediate investigation on a missing child rather than waiting 72 hours.
And how many states to date have adopted?
7 that I know of, and there may be more that have added throughout the country, but at the time that's what our push was, is to get at least the states throughout the Midwest on it.